strange how business works in such an environment, non-for-profit sector, what have you, but as it turns out, I have grown up in one or two other Drysdales, if you like. But look, thanks for having us this morning, and thank you for getting up on a holiday, start of a long weekend. You didn't have to do this morning, but thank you. Heather and I had a wonderful sail over here on Wednesday, because we've got a yacht that's moored on the other side of the bay, and what we did was put a little yacht on top of the yacht that we've come across on, because I'm competing in a 4-day series at Geelong, just in this little yacht that sits on the beach, and we go out and race it. But Heather and I are actually living on the big yacht. And I have to start by apologising, because I got up this morning and we're just a couple of rough yachties at the moment, We don't have a... That's right, that's why my hair looks like it is, and I got berated by Heather this morning saying, "You're going to this important civic function today, and you look like a yachtsman." And I said, "You're dead right." And I apologise for that, but it was, 30 knots yesterday, and we don't have a huge amount of water on the boat, etc., etc. But anyway, you've got me. As we came over a couple of days ago, it reminded me of really what was an extraordinary year for me in particular in 2011, and I'm not going to dwell on this morning, but 2 years ago to the day was my first day as Australian of the Year. Now, most Australians of the Year are really well known. Last night, Ida Buttrose became the latest Australian of the Year. Preceding her was Geoffrey Rush, and over the years we've had all sorts of really famous people. There was a period of time when we really loved our sporting heroes to be Australians of the Year, and you had about a 68% chance, if you were captain of the Australian Test cricket side, of being Australian of the Year at some point during your reign. But we've gone into a different era now, and we get all sorts of different people. I felt really awkward this day 2 years ago, not because I wasn't proud isn't the right word, but I've had a good life, a very fortunate life, all sorts of good things have happened to me. But I felt awkward because the reason I guess I'd become Australian of the Year is not because of my sporting or my business or what I've done anywhere else. It's just that 15 or 20 years ago, I had a choice. It was that simple. I didn't, when it was all boiled down, I didn't actually have to work full-time if I didn't want to. I was very lucky. And I just made a decision that I thought that the non-for-profit sector, the charitable, the community sector, which was something I'd always had a little bit to do with, but I thought I'd just try and find some opportunities to invest some more time in that sector. It wasn't a hard decision for me because I happened to choose things where I got a whole lot more back than I ever gave to those organisations, and it was across an array of different activities, overseas aid and Indigenous, environmental, sport, education, what have you. Just dabbled here and there, and I was explaining to one of you, what's your name?
Tom.
That's right, Tom. Explaining to Tom, he sort of grilled me about 10 minutes ago and said, what did you say?
What's your passion?
What's your passion like? It's a really tough question for me, because I could say, it's going to the movies or sailing or whatever, but I think you're asking a different question. What's really deep inside you? And in truth, I had to answer it this way. I said, I'm not a world authority on anything. I have enjoyed business success and all this sort of stuff, but actually, I'm not an authority, an expert on anything. What I'm passionate about is actually seeing extraordinary, inspirational people and being very happy to play a role in keeping them extraordinary and special. And I think I used one example. Tim Costello is a fellow that I've known for a long time. And in fact, I slotted in just between Tim and Peter, and I actually had a bit to do with each of them. But, Tim does a great job at World Vision. He's done a great job with the anti-gambling campaigns for many, many years, and I'm just very happy to literally be someone that circles around behind him every now and then, opening a door, facilitating this. That's my passion. I don't actually need to be out in the limelight. You can imagine 2 years ago, why did I feel awkward? Not because I wasn't a celebrity or famous. It's just that I've had first-hand experience of the millions of people in this country just like me. And I suspect the room is full of them this morning. People that actually just do their part, their bit for the community, because it just seems the right thing to do. And hopefully we actually get something really positive out of it. We're not just sacrificial lambs doing something out of a duty, but it's actually enriching and fulfilling for us. And because I felt really awkward, because why, out of all the people in Australia, was I chosen? And there is no right answer to that, and I'm not going to try and answer it, but what it did give me a wonderful opportunity was to spend a whole year talking about my experiences of just being part of the non-for-profit sector. I don't talk about giving to the non-for-profit sector because all I know is that when you get the right opportunities to be part of it, I just seem to get more back than I've ever given. And this wonderful hall I was just seeing over here, December 1912, 100 years, fabulous. And I know that you've had some great celebrations about this hall. I've got to say that notice is amazing. It started off as a Sunday school hall, and very proudly it was opened free of debt. I know. You don't see that much anymore, do you? But it's interesting, actually. I shouldn't really say this, but I'll say it anyway, that whilst Heather and I, we live on the Mornington Peninsula most of the time, but we need a little base up in the suburbs, because I still have a lot to do with the city. And I can say this publicly, but just recently we've bought a little place in Sandringham. And let me just get this out right. But the place itself is actually my grandparents' old place. I mean, they've been dead for many, many years. And my father and his three brothers and sister were all home birthed at this little place. Indeed, we'll be settling on the property the day, if my father was still alive, would turn 100. And it all happened about 100 years ago. So there you go. I wanted to spend just a moment or two going a long way away from dry stuff now to the world of big business. Now, this may not be of relevance to you, but I just want to tell you a couple of things that you might find interesting and we'll come back to what's important in the Ballerine. The world of business, big business, is, look, as you know, full of smart people wearing suits and thinking they're pretty important, and consultants and what have you. But 2013, there's a couple of really interesting things happening. I think the first is that the evidence is undeniable that business itself is held in very, very low regard, generally, by the community. I think every year there's a Reader's Digest Trust Index issued annually, I don't know when. And it looks at a number of different ways in which the community trusts individuals or organisations or whatever. But one of the surveys they do is that they slice and dice us into 45 different areas. So there are doctors and, vocations, I mean, doctors and teachers, nurses, all sorts of people. And out of those 45 different areas, you've got to get down to about number 32 before anyone with any connection with business starts to appear. I think accountants come in at 32. And bearing in mind, of course, that 1, 2 and 3 are invariably ambulance people, teachers, nurses, they're always the most popular. So you get down to 32 and you finally find an accountant. I think lawyers perhaps come in at 36, 37. CEOs are at 40 out of 45. And to the extent that the people that follow them are sex workers and people that do phones, politicians, you can see that CEOs are not held in particularly high regard. They are the face of business. And I guess as a result of that, business is talking much more frequently about what can it do about that? And I want to make this distinction right up front, that small, medium enterprises do not have this problem, typically, because you're part and parcel of the community, and I want to come back to that in a little while. But big business, Alcoa, very removed often from the local community, is absolutely targeted by the community as being on the nose. And I want to now sort of flash forward to the US, because some of the largest organisations in the world, the GEs, the IBMs, Googles, Johnson & Johnson, Unilever, they might just sound like household big corporate names, but very seriously they are taking this issue as seriously as they can. And they're doing it in all sorts of different ways. They actually need to take it seriously because they're finding that if they want to get the very best of the Zacks and what have you, the new people coming through, the new talent, the people who are going to be running the organisation in 20 years' time, no longer can they be seen to have this anti-community or uncaring DNA inside it. They know that they simply won't get the sort of people that they really need to run these companies in the quantity that they need. We're actually in an era too where companies literally can become overnight sensations. I won't talk about the dot-com boom and what's happening in online and what have you, but obviously we've had some of the largest companies in the world today were just thoughts 10 or 15 years ago. So there really is this demand for talent, and young people really do have enormous choice. And so if I can put it this way, traditional multinationals are thinking long and hard internally, how do we actually change ourselves? And probably the world's most authoritative business academic is a guy called Professor Michael Porter. He's based in Harvard. And he's coined this phrase called shared value. Now, it doesn't matter, everyone's got lots of phrases to describe the same thing, but it's a matter of trying to think of all sorts of ways in which the company becomes not just out in one corner, seeking to maximise profit, forever asking the government for another tax break or a better IR regime or whatever, but says, they're important, but what's even more important is actually to be part of the real world, part of the community. That's not that hard for an SME. It is very hard for a large organisation that's global and seen as being very powerful. I'm not going to say too much more about it except to say that this stuff actually is real. What does it mean for us in Drysdale? Probably not a lot today, but I think we're going to find change over the next 10 or 15 years, and there's a reason why. Because I think, as I might have also been explaining to Tom, there's some very interesting data that's only just appeared in the last few years. Stock market performance data. And this is important because whether it's in a super fund or whether you're a big fund manager managing billions of dollars, obviously the share price of a company is measurable, it's important. 10 or 15 years ago, people like Michael Porter were talking about the fact that a company which is wired well, has good values, doesn't just talk publicly about something but does something else behind the scenes, but is true to good values. They were saying that theoretically that company ought to do better than one that's basically selfish and only interested in making money. That was the theory. But there was no evidence to confirm that at all. Amazingly, the last 3 or 4 years, the data, and we look back obviously over a period of decades to measure this, but the data is amazing. There's, if you go into any large stockbroking firm now, you'll find 2 or 3 analysts not focused on natural resources or manufacturing or agriculture or whatever. They're focused in a little area called ESG. What the heck does that stand for? E is for environmental, S is for social, and G is for governance. And what they do is, they don't care whether the company is digging stuff out of the ground or creating a flu vaccine or whatever. They're interested in how the company is wired. Is it actually focused on being environmentally responsible? and trying to keep its power usage down, and trying to keep its footprint small, is it actually focused on its people, the social bit. And you can measure that nowadays by way of employee turnover, and many of the large companies have to disclose results of employee surveys and satisfaction, all that sort of stuff. You can measure what the people actually think of the company they work for. And thirdly, G for governance. What's the whole board situation like? Is it kind of full of old people that have passed their use by date and just interested in going there for lunch? Or has it really got good people that are focused, working hard, no conflicts, doing their bit? And the analysts, and it's only happened relatively recently, are trying to work out how do you measure this ESG, because it's all a bit airy-fairy stuff, but they're getting better and better at it. And remarkably, when you then look back over a few decades, the companies that have actually focused on getting this bit right, as well as running a good business, simply outperform, simply end up with a stronger share price. And all I know is that I find that encouraging, because there's hope, if you like, and it may well be that in decades to come, if the good CEOs can get out the right message and say, look, undeniably, I work for a big company, I get paid a lot of money. That's always very controversial. How do you justify getting, paying someone $5 million a year for running a company, and a nurse gets, $65,000? Doesn't sound right. But nevertheless, they're going to have to be saying, yep, I get paid a lot of money, but we're actually running an enterprise that is decent. Yes, we have a return on investment, we have to maximise profit, but there are a whole lot of other things that we're doing whereby we're actually doing our bit for the community. If I had 2 hours out, I'm happy to go on and on about that. I might be a little bit naive, the world does move slowly, but I happen to say that we're in an era now, and interestingly, it's being pushed by Gen Y and Gen Z. It's not being pushed by 55-year-olds or 60-year-olds. In fact, we're getting dragged, kicking and screaming along this pathway. But nowadays, if I interview a new person coming into Macquarie, once upon a time, I asked them the questions. Nowadays, not that I do any interviewing anymore for this, but nowadays it's the other way around. I'm lucky to get a question in, because it's a 23-year-old that's got their straight H1 honours out of Melbourne, they're a Rhodes Scholar or whatever. We want to get them, and they're saying, tell us, what do you do for the community? Yeah, give me some time off to travel overseas and work in Tanzania. Are you serious about encouraging your employees to be part of the community sector or not? And if you give the wrong answers, they'll say, well, thanks very much, but we've got something else better to do. I might be gilding the lily just a tiny bit, but let me tell you, it's not that much. And the change is coming, and I think it's actually long overdue. The world has got far too much pressure on it at the moment, and we actually do need enormous change, and the big corporate area will have to play part of it. But let's come back to Drysdale. As I said a little while ago, coincidentally, I think I've had a couple of stages of my life where I had a Drysdale sort of experience. I grew up as a little boy in Dandenong. Dandenong is obviously being consumed by Melbourne. Melbourne suburbs nowadays. But when I was a kid, it was a country town. Tuesdays was market day. The trucks would actually come in with all the cattle, and my dad had a little chemist shop. But Tuesday was the big day because the country would come into to Dandenong. But as I was growing up, it was going through extraordinary change because General Motors, Heinz, International Harvester, they were all building their enormous factories, and there was this wave of migration coming in literally every month. The kids in my school would be growing. We had 50 different ethnicities in my little school, and there seemed to be a different nation represented every month. And my father, who I blame a little bit for me being like I am today, because he was involved in various service clubs and the local hospital, all that sort of stuff. And I noticed carefully that actually both my mum and my dad just got a big kick out of being part of a local community. But importantly, I think my dad had the knack of not so much bringing people together, but we were immigrants ourselves into Dandenong. I think my parents only arrived there a year or two before I was born. And I remember as a young boy him saying that, well, that family over there and that family there and the people who live down the street, they're real Dandenong people. They've been there for a long, long time. And it's important to understand how they feel about change. And I couldn't really understand what he was saying as a 7-year-old. It took me a while to get on his wavelength. But he was perceptive. He did understand that with all this wave of migration coming in, there were people struggling with that because the face of their town was changing very, very rapidly. I saw it in recent years when at a property, a little place we lived at the back of Pakenham, about 10 k's away in the early 90s. Pakenham Upper, halfway between Pakenham and Gembrook, and really its own little community wasn't that affected, really, by all that was happening in that crazy Pakenham corridor. It was just sort of growing and still growing today. But again, the same issues, people that had lived in the area for 80, 100 years versus the new people that were coming in. And I don't have a whole lot to add about that this morning, Anne, except to say this, that if there's anything that seemed to work really well, it was, funnily enough, through the non-for-profit sector. It was getting people with their different perspectives, their different histories, their different journeys, why we'd all ended up in the same place, but some had grandparents and great-grandparents living here, and others would just come relatively recently. But sitting around a table, whether it was getting a new school off the ground or running a church or whatever it was, and getting the people with their different perspectives around the table and just talking it through, listening was more important than talking, and then trying to come up with something that wasn't ever going to suit everybody. But at least it was a go at reflecting where this diversity of view now was. And yes, it was really hard for the people that had been there for a long time, but it was equally hard for the newbies, for the people that had just come in as well, because it didn't feel like home for them. And many of the new people, of course, are living in new estates with not a great amount of services and facilities and all sorts of things that we've come to expect. Hard for them, hard for the old people, but life is like that. A couple of days ago, I had a race, a yacht race, and my little yacht had actually been over to the United States in the last 6 months. I've only got back recently, and I've actually hardly sailed it. We had these World Championships in Florida, and over the last 5 months, it's spent most of its time in transit. And I got back on the boat, and my first race, I came 15th out of 20, hopeless. And I looked back and I said, what went wrong? Because every minute I was really trying. I was looking at the sail and the telltales and trying to steer the boat right, and I couldn't have made the boat go any faster. The problem was that I'd failed to see the big picture. I'd only really just got back on the boat, and I was getting to know it again, and I was looking myopically at what was happening inside the boat, trying to go faster. The smart guys in the fleet, they knew how to sail the boats, and they were looking around at the big picture. Is the wind over there or over there? Watch out for that damn big Alcoa smelter. It has a huge wind shadow, which I sailed right into at one point. That sort of thing, keeping the eyes out of the boat. And it's really a bit like what strategy is all about, in that we can run our businesses perfectly, every day. Make sure everyone gets paid and repainted every 5 years, whatever. But sometimes we're in a place, and I would suggest that the only constant today is actually change, especially in an area like this. and that somehow we have to be disciplined running our own businesses to ensure that are we looking around enough and seeing what else is going on? Is my business going to be relevant in 5 or 10 years' time? What is the change? And of course the change now is so much technological as well. If you're not wired in to what that means, you've got to work out how to do that somehow. It often means bringing in other people or at least consulting with other people. But that's the mistake I made in that first race. I wasn't looking around and seeing the bigger picture. Now, what that means for Drysdale, gosh, I'm not sure. I know you had a big session yesterday. You have an economic